Today on Audio Basics, we're going to talk about the problems of bass. Not all of the problems, but particularly some of the much misunderstood problems of bass reproduction with audio systems in real rooms, the rooms we live in. That means we're not going to talk today about how woofers work or how woofers go in boxes or different alignments like acoustic suspension or ported or transmission line, or how the polar radiation of planar speakers tends to affect bass output. All of those kinds of things are not, the speaker-specific things are not what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the problems that every audio system has in reproducing bass in real rooms. We hope you enjoy it. Okay, boys and girls, we're doing something different today. I'm going to start with the basic challenge that we've got. And that is that audio has a problem. Yes, I'm going to admit it. Those of us in the industry tend to kind of skirt around the issue or not talk about it very much. And that's largely because we don't exactly know what to do about it. And the problem is bass. Yes, bass is a problem because it's important. I think you'll agree. And the problem with bass is pretty universal. In fact, it's so universal that I'm pretty sure you have a bass problem. I don't mean you personally, I mean your audio system has a bass problem. Your audio system and my audio system and Robert Harley's audio system have a bass problem. The difficulty and the reason that we don't talk about it very much is, I don't want to say nobody knows what to do about it, but the answers aren't simple. And the answers are answers that often people don't like. So we tend to just not talk about it, a little bit like Crazy Uncle Harry, who everyone knows is crazy, but we don't really want to talk about him in polite company. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Tom Martin, executive publisher of The Absolute Sound and a reviewer here on the TAS YouTube channel. I'd like to make you aware of an offer to get our weekly newsletter simply by providing your email address through the link that's on screen right now, or there's a link in the show notes below. Twice a week, we will send you written audio reviews, music reviews, news of new audio gear, and our 3 times a year Editor's Choice, Product of the Year, and Golden Ear awards so that you can find the best audio equipment that's currently on the market. It's easy to sign up, and we hope you'll join us. Now back to the show. I want to spend a minute on why subwoofers are such a problem. Because I think this is not usually discussed in technical terms. It's usually discussed as it's just hard and vague and I believe misguided concepts like the subwoofer was slow or fast are used to explain why things don't work. And actually, if you break it down, it's not that hard to understand why this is a challenging technical problem. That's one part about it. And B, it's completely understandable, and how you address it is moderately straightforward. It doesn't make it easy. It makes it understandable, and it makes it something that if you want to put the effort in, you can figure it out. And I believe you can make subwoofers work with main speakers reasonably, I can't say easily, but you can certainly make it work well. Okay, so let's talk about the 4 problems of subwoofers. This might not be the perfect way to think about it, but I think it's a really helpful way to think about it. The first problem with subwoofers is really a problem with bass. It's a problem with bass with all speakers, and that is that you're reproducing sound in a room, and the room has resonances. And those resonances occur at distinctive frequencies that are a function of the dimensions of the room, the length, the width, the height. So those dimensions control where the resonances are, and you end up with peaks and valleys in the frequency response in the bass because of those room resonances. Now, I want to emphasize what I just said has nothing to do with subwoofers, really. It just has to do with making bass, and to make bass we use woofers. So it has to do with all woofers, whether they're integrated into a box with a mid-range and tweeters and other stuff, or whether they're separate, as in the case of a subwoofer. And I'll also add, as an aside, I'm going to keep using the term subwoofer because it's how normal people talk about the subject, but really we're talking about woofers here for the most part. We're talking about reproducing bass, and most of the bass that matters is actually mid bass and upper bass, and lower bass, I don't want to say it's inconsequential, but we're not just talking about devices used to optimize lower bass. We're talking about devices here, in the case of this video, we're talking about devices that we're trying to use to optimize overall bass performance. So this is not subwoofers in the sense of home theater where you're trying to reproduce dinosaur footfalls or something like that. Okay, so problem number one with woofers in general, with bass in general, is room resonances. You get peaks and valleys in the level of the bass due to the dimensions of the room. Problem number two, and I'm simplifying here, but I think this is a really useful way to think about it. Problem number two is something we can call room leakage. Your walls will transmit sound. If you've lived in an apartment, you know what I'm talking about. You can hear the argument that boyfriend and girlfriend are having next door because the sound is transmitted through the walls. This is particularly a problem at low frequencies, and we're talking about woofers and low frequencies here. So depending on the construction of your house, you will have more or less room leakage. And that means that you will get more or less bass than the designers imagined you might get from the speaker that they built, and you have to come up with some way to deal with that. One way to deal with that is if you have a leaky room, you just let the bass roll off and you live with it. Or contrary to that, if you have a room with very stiff walls, like let's say concrete, you deal with the fact that you hear those resonances I talked about in the first part of this, and you hear them loud and clear, and you don't know what to do about it, and you don't know how to get rid of them because the bass resonances are really, I don't want to say amplified, but they're really well produced. They're not leaked away. So the leakage of the room at bass frequencies is something you, to some degree, unless you happen to have room that matches the room that your designer had in mind, the speaker designer had in mind, you've got more or less bass than was originally imagined, and you probably want to deal with that. So that's the second issue. The third issue we have with woofers is something called the Schrader frequency. The Schrader frequency, it basically goes back to my original point about room modes and room resonances, but I want to look at it in a slightly different way because it's very important to understand, and it kind of creates a second level problem with resonances. Okay. The Schrader frequency for many rooms that are typical living environments that you would have in your home is around 200 hertz. What is the Schrader frequency, though? The Schrader frequency is the frequency at which all of those room modes, those resonances, are kind of distinct and can be heard on their own. That's below the Schrader frequency, and think of it just as a rule of thumb as below 200 hertz. And above the Schrader frequency, there are so many resonances, tangential modes and longitudinal modes and so on. You get so many resonances that they all kind of add together in a way that the response is relatively smooth. So the problems we're talking about mainly occur, the problems we're talking about with bass mainly occur below the Schrader frequency, which is, roughly speaking, again, 200 hertz. Use that as a rule of thumb. And what that means is that if you're going to have a woofer system that addresses the bass problems in your room, it needs to be able to go up to around 200 hertz. Yes, you could cross it over at a lower frequency, but now whatever you're doing in the design of the woofer system doesn't really have any tools to address the problems we're talking about with room modes and room leakage. So if you want to look at it through the lens of the Schrader frequency, you'd really like to have a woofer that goes up to 200 hertz, except I'm saying you would want to have a woofer that probably goes up to around 200 hertz flat and then begins to roll off. If, just for the sake of example, we used a 6 dB per octave roll-off to get down to negative 24 or negative 30 dB relative to that 200 hertz level, we need a woofer that goes out to 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 hertz. Whoa, we need a woofer that's got good upper mid-range? Yes, we do. And that's an interesting problem that has been recognized for years by really technically astute designers, which is it's hard to make a good woofer system that is good enough at mid-range frequencies to really be used at the right crossover frequency so that you can use the sophisticated design features we're talking about here to address these problems. So the Schrader frequency being around 200 hertz is kind of inconvenient. You may know, those of you who have home theaters or who have looked at home theaters, you may know that typically subwoofers are thought of as being crossed over at 80 hertz. That's convenient if you're a subwoofer designer, but it's not actually ideal if you're trying to tame the problems of room resonances and room leakage, because the problem extends well above that frequency. And it happens that the frequencies we're talking about are very musically meaningful because the fundamentals of lots of instruments are down in the low hundreds of hertz, 100, 200, 300, 400. So everything we're talking about, it relates to fundamental frequencies of real instruments that we listen to every day, whether it's voice or guitar or bass or horns or whatever it might be. So problem number 3 is the Schrader frequency is inconveniently high, and therefore we need a woofer system that will go up to relatively high frequencies, or we need to use really steep slopes on crossover, but even then we want to be able to go up to 400 or 800 hertz, and those are design features that I think are often overlooked by people who are either designing or people who are installing subwoofer systems. Okay, so those are 3 of the core problems. Now, the 4th problem that we're going to talk about with bass and woofers is one that's generally, I think, thought of to be the core problem, but I want to separate it out because I think it's got its own distinctive characteristics. And that is that we've got to have the quality and nature of the bass that's coming from whatever woofer system we're using. That's got to be well integrated with the main speakers. Okay. So, what do I mean by that? Well, the first thing you can think about is balance. We've got to be able to set the level of the woofer so that it's balanced with the main speaker. If you have the integrated system where you bought the woofer in a cabinet with a mid-range and a tweeter, a conventional speaker for most of you, a lot of that integration work to get the level of the bass and the level of the mid-range and the level of the treble well matched is being done by the designer back at the factory using sophisticated tools and really making sure that under a variety of circumstances the integration happens well. But if you listen to the first part of this, you've still got problems that the designer can't possibly anticipate. So what are we going to do? Well, one solution is to create a separate woofer system and integrate that with the main system. That allows us to do some different things to address room resonances. It allows us to do some different things to address the amount of bass we have to deal with room leakage and secondarily room dimensions and what's called room gain. I've lumped all those things together to some degree, but we can make adjustments with a separate woofer system often more easily than we could with a system that's integrated. But what that leaves us with is it leaves us in the position of being the designer, so we, the user, have to set the levels and do the integration and get the phases right, and it creates a complex problem. This, I believe, is what people normally talk about as being the hard part, and it is certainly one of the hard parts. But what I'm trying to set up here is that there is kind of an inherent trade-off with bass systems in general. You can have very good upper bass and mid-range integration done at the factory by superb engineers who've worked for years getting these components dialed in and the crossovers built and the cabinets and the speaker arrays set up to do that integration well. And that's a wonderful thing, and that's what many people choose to do, and I get it. It makes a heck of a lot of sense. But what you kind of give up in that process, and what I'm setting up here is, I think, a pretty inherent trade-off is you give up some of the ability to tune the speaker for room resonances and to tune the speaker for room leakage. Okay, so there's kind of an inherent trade-off there. If you go the other way, get a separate woofer system, now a lot of the integration of that separate woofer system with the main loudspeaker has to be done by you, and that puts you in the role of the engineer, and that is almost certainly going to mean work, but ultimately might allow you to deal with resonances and might allow you to deal with room leakage and might allow you to set a crossover frequency that takes into account the Schrader frequency such that you might end up with a different result. I think in some ways that might be the more logical system, but you have to be prepared to put the work in, and even if you do put the work in, I mean, no offense, but you just might not have the talent, or you might guess wrong, or whatever. So to the degree that you're not prepared to put in that level of effort, as a general rule, I think you're going to find that a separate woofer system, although I believe theoretically it could be better, is somewhat harder to deal with. Okay, enough. Those are the problems with woofers. I don't think that separate woofers. I don't think they're inherent to separate woofers, other than the integration bit. And equally, lacking a separate woofer has inherent problems. So they're just inherent problems with bass, and it's kind of a matter of pick your poison, or if you like playing with equipment and working on this stuff, which many of us do, it's a matter of, pick your joy. I hope you've enjoyed this. As always, we invite you to subscribe, click on the notification button, and we hope you'll come back and watch more of our videos. Thanks for watching.